A thumping defeat for the Tory amendment, but that was always expected because this wasn't about winning this vote. This was about the Tory leadership wanting to get cut through with the voters to an issue, perhaps the first big new policy of Kemi Badenoch's leadership, supporting a public inquiry into grooming gangs, which she thinks is going to work with voters, and which I understand Conservatives intend to start using on the doorstep or on the iPhone to campaign against Labour MPs in their seats, saying, well, why didn't your Labour MP back this? Labour is saying that actually this was the Tories effectively, potentially, trying to bring down a bill that has child safeguarding measures in it, and that was sickening. The Tories said phooey, or words to that, words of a similar meaning, and said that actually the whole bill, as far as they were concerned, was pretty much a disgrace because it was rowing back bits of the bill on the Academies programme that the Tories pushed after Tony Blair had brought it in. We got a flavour of that fundamental argument about the national inquiry in Prime Minister's questions, and here's a flavour of those exchanges.
The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Doesn't help one bit. We already know what the major flaws are, and my argument is we should get on with that action.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do 2 things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker. How are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years.
You don't have to be a lip reader to see that Kemi Badenoch was saying absolute rubbish repeatedly then when Keir Starmer was speaking. There was a change of tone in what Keir Starmer was saying today. On Monday, when he was answering questions at his beginning of the year launch, which was meant to be talking about the NHS, but this issue of grooming gangs seems to have dominated this first week back for Parliament. There, at that launch, he was saying that Kemi Badenoch, by calling for an inquiry, was on a far-right bandwagon. Today, he said people are allowed to call for an inquiry. It's a perfectly legitimate thing to call for an inquiry. He wanted to make sure he was showing respect to people, particularly victims and victims groups who might be calling for an inquiry, but he wanted to separate Kemi Badenoch from them and say actually she was up to a different game, courting favour on the right and courting favour with that tycoon we keep talking about in America, Elon Musk, who tweeted at the end of it all that Kemi Badenoch had been brave and true.
Gary, you're always brave and true. Thank you very much. Let's go to Kira now in Leeds.
Thanks, Kathy. Let's talk more about this now with former Norfolk Chief Constable Simon Bailey, who was also the national lead for child protection at the National Police Chiefs Council. Let's start with now, please, Simon Bailey. How many grooming gangs are currently operating in the UK and in how many places?
There are hundreds of investigations that are currently ongoing around the country, but they won't all involve the particular form of abuse that has become such an issue in the last week or so. And the police response to the threat of this particular form of abuse has improved significantly since Alexis Jay's review into Rotherham in 2014. In the last decade, the response looks fundamentally different to the failings that she found, the systemic failings that she found in Rotherham that have subsequently been found in other reviews that have taken place in the last decade. But what
But
I
you were
would
the
say
national
is,
lead, Simon. You were the national lead for this, so that was very recently. People will want to know the scale of this, because that's been a lot of discussion about this over the past few days. So how many places are we talking about where this has been going on recently?
I think it'll be taking place around the country, but what is not being addressed is that actually the particular model of abuse that has become such a political issue in the last week accounts for less than 3% of the recorded child sexual abuse that is occurring. And actually, I think that is probably a bigger issue. 55% and more is actually being perpetrated by a child on another child. To go to the points that are being made, there have been multiple reviews. Professor Jay's 7-year, £185 million review has made 20 recommendations to improving safeguarding in England and Wales. I think the time has now come to start looking forward and to start addressing the failings that have been identified to improve the present child protection arrangements and safeguarding arrangements to ensure that we don't make the mistakes that we have historically made.
And some of those failings are not so historic, are they? We on this programme have reported cases over the past months of grooming victims saying they weren't believed or even themselves arrested by the police. So are there still officers now who are failing victims of grooming?
Of course, there will be occasions when the service that's being provided by the statutory partners, and we should recognise that colleagues in health, education, social care are just as responsible. On occasions, mistakes will be made. But what I can say with great confidence is that in the last 10 years, significant improvements have been made. More charges are being presented to the courts, and convictions are being secured. And what we shouldn't lose sight of.
I'm sorry to cut in there. We're a bit short of time at this point, but part of the call now for a national public inquiry is that people don't feel that there's been accountability necessary, particularly in terms of the police failings that we've heard about in so many of these reviews. I mean, have police officers, for instance, and how many have lost their jobs because of their role in this scandal?
I don't know those figures, but what I can say with real confidence is that I was the National Policing Lead in 2014. I was responsible for overseeing the police service response to the J review. I know, and I can say with great confidence, that the response to investigations of the type that we've been describing has improved beyond all recognition. But this comes down to how partners are dealing with it, how doctors are dealing with it within. Sorry.
In Rotherham, for instance, when the Independent Office for Police Conduct conducted a long review into the police failings there, they found 14 officers guilty of misconduct. The most serious sanction was a final written warning. So no wonder people are now calling for accountability if there wasn't even any in Rotherham, of all places.
But can I just make the point, though, that we know about the failings. We know where there was systemic failing. We know where there wasn't the professional curiosity. We know, because of the cultural sensitivities, police officers, social workers weren't doing what they were supposed to do. But we are sitting on so many recommendations that will improve the response. A further review, in my opinion, will not add anything further to our knowledge, our awareness and understanding. And the time has now come to take action. The time has now come to implement the recommendations of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, where 7,000 victim survivors had the courage and the confidence to come forward. What has been lost in this debate is the victim survivor's voice. And of course, I recognise that there will be some victim survivors that would want to hold people to account. I understand that. But what we have to be reassuring ourselves is that actually these mistakes are not repeated, that we improve the response, and we should be taking action now to make sure the failings of the past are not replicated.
Simon Bailey, Thank you very much for speaking with us. Cathy, back to you.
Thanks, Kieran. We can also now speak to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, who joins us from Parliament. Chris Philp, the former Norfolk Chief Constable, Simon Bailey, was just saying there that the police have really got their act together on investigating grooming gangs now. So the work should be for them rather than for an inquiry, shouldn't it?
Well, look, the last government did set up the Grooming Gangs Task Force following the ICSA report, and in its first year of operation, it led to 550 arrests of perpetrators. So work was done by the last government and it's continuing today. But this is about getting the truth about the failings of the past. You know, thousands and thousands of young, vulnerable, early teenage girls were systemically raped by gangs of men, principally of Pakistani heritage, and local authorities, the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, failed to investigate, failed to believe them, failed to prosecute the criminals, and in some cases even actively covered up what was going on for reasons of cultural sensitivity, or not wanting to be, which is a ridiculous phrase in this context, or not wanting to be perceived as being racist. Those were terrible, shocking failures, morally reprehensible, and the victims deserve to find out the truth. Those responsible, those people who were in positions of authority and positions of responsibility at the time, who failed these young girls or even actively covered up what was going on, should be held to account. Not a single person, individual in authority has been held to account. There is a criminal offence, misconduct in public office, and if this inquiry, national inquiry, had happened, as I wanted it to and many others wanted it to, including victims, then there is a chance some of those people responsible for covering this up or for ignoring it would be prosecuted.
Right, well, you've now tabled an amendment to try and put this inquiry into place. That's been voted down. But had it been passed, the entire Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill would have fallen. That brought in measures such as safeguards for home-educated children. It would compel local authorities to establish safeguarding teams. It would introduce a unique number for every child so that vulnerable children are better protected. You would have jeopardised that for what your opponents say is simple political opportunism.
No, look, standing up for victims who need to get to the truth is not opportunism, and I completely disagree with what Keir Starmer said on Monday when he said that people who were raising this issue were from the far right. That is an outrageous slur, a slur and a smear, and it's exactly...
Well, he didn't quite say that, but the thing is, where were you, Chris Philp, and where was Kemi Badenoch, your leader? Where was Robert Jemrick, who also stood for the leadership, is now one of your shadow cabinet colleagues? Where were they standing up for victims in Parliament? None of you have.
Well, I don't think that's true. I mean, as you know, when I was a minister in the Home Office, we had enormously regular meetings on things like Operation Soteria, which you may have heard of, which was a specialist unit designed to identify and prosecute rape and serious sexual assault.
Yeah,
just to give you
have
one
not
example.
once spoken about grooming gangs in the Commons since you were elected as an MP until the last few days.
Well, look, I mean, the work I've just described
to you,
the work I've just described to you in the Home Office was chasing after perpetrators of these offences, including gangs. For example, we met on a monthly basis, chasing after these issues. And I've told you the last government set up a grooming gangs task force that
it's funny you didn't mention this in Parliament.
That arrested 550 people. But look, we do need to get to the truth around this. The inquiry, the ICSA inquiry, only looked at 6 towns. And some of these local inquiries, like the Manchester one that the Prime Minister mentioned today at PMQs, don't have the legal powers that are needed in order to compel witnesses to come and give evidence, to get documents. And in fact, the chairs of that inquiry resigned because they couldn't get hold of the evidence. And only a national public inquiry can get hold of that evidence.
Chris Philp, I'm afraid we have to end it there, but thank you very much for joining us.